4:11 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. An American RQ-4 Global Hawk was already banking over the Strait of Hormuz when its defensive suite screamed a warning. This was not a routine surveillance track. The high-altitude drone had been painting the Iranian coastline for 6 hours, but at 60,000 feet, it should have been untouchable. Something in the Iranian air defense network had changed. The air was thin and freezing at the edge of space. Below, the dark waters of the Gulf were dotted with the lights of oil tankers, moving like slow, glowing embers through the world's most dangerous choke point. The Global Hawk, a massive unmanned aircraft with the wingspan of a commercial airliner, was designed for persistence. It was a silent eye in the sky. But at 4:12 in the morning, that eye saw a flash of light erupt from a mobile launcher near Bandar Abbas. Inside a windowless ground control station thousands of miles away, a pilot stared at a flickering data link. The sensor feed from the drone showed a white plume of smoke rising rapidly from the Iranian coast. The pilot spoke into his headset. "Command, this is Ghost Rider 1-1. I have a surface-to-air missile launch. Bearing 095. Range 30 nautical miles." The controller's voice was flat, professional. "Ghost Rider. Confirming launch. Execute defensive maneuvers." "Negative." "Command," the pilot replied. "The missile is high velocity. Time to impact is 15 seconds." The Global Hawk attempted to bank, its long, slender wings straining against the rarefied air. It was not a fighter jet. It could not outrun a solid-fuel interceptor. On the radar screen, the two dots converged. The Iranian missile, an indigenous Khordad-15, corrected its flight path with lethal precision. At 4:13 in the morning, the data link severed. The screen in the control station turned to static. 300 miles to the south, the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln erupted into activity. Blue light from the consoles reflected off the faces of specialized technicians. A radar officer called out, "Vampire is gone. Signal lost at 62,000 feet. We have a debris field forming 20 nautical miles off the coast of Iran." The watch officer stepped toward the center of the room. Was it in international airspace? "GPS telemetry puts the impact 3 miles outside their territorial limit, sir," the officer replied. "But the wreckage is drifting. The current is pushing it straight toward Iranian waters." This was the crisis everyone had feared. The Global Hawk was not just an expensive aircraft. It carried the integrated sensor suite, a highly classified collection of signals intelligence hardware that could map an entire nation's communications in a single pass. If that technology fell into the hands of Iranian engineers, the American advantage in the region would be neutralized for a decade. The watch officer looked at the digital map. Several Iranian fast boats were already moving at high speed toward the predicted splash zone. They had been waiting. "Launch the search and rescue birds," the officer ordered. "Tell the pilots they are to establish a perimeter around the impact site. Do not cross the 12-mile limit unless authorized, but do not let anyone touch that sensor pod." The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 4:20 in the morning. The Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. The USS Abraham Lincoln was a city of steel in a black ocean. On its flight deck, the humid night air was shattered by the roar of 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters. Their rotors blurred into translucent discs as they lifted off, banking hard toward the north. These were not just transport birds. They carried specialized recovery divers and electronic warfare technicians. Their mission was simple: locate the wreckage, protect the sensor pod. Inside the lead helicopter, call sign Guardian 1, a chief petty officer, checked his gear. The green glow of his night vision goggles illuminated a cabin filled with specialized salvage equipment. Beside him, a diver tightened the straps on a rebreather. They knew the risks. They were flying into a graveyard of expensive titanium and classified silicon. The pilot's voice crackled over the internal comms. 2 minutes to the debris field. I have multiple surface contacts on radar. High speed, coming from the north. Confirming, the co-pilot replied. Those are Iranian Baghamar fast boats. At least 6 of them. They are doing 40 knots. At 4:30 in the morning, The helicopters arrived at the coordinates. The sea was littered with white fragments of composite material. The massive wings of the Global Hawk had shattered upon impact, spreading across a square mile of water. In the center of the field, a large, dark shape bobbed in the swells. It was the main fuselage. It was still floating, but only just. The pilot of Guardian 1 hovered at 50 feet. His searchlight cut through the darkness, hitting the water. Command, we have eyes on the bird. The tail section is submerged. The sensor bay is still attached to the main body. But we have company. Less than 500 meters away, the first Iranian fast boat skidded to a halt. It was a twin-engine patrol craft, armed with a heavy machine gun and a rocket launcher. Its crew was already on deck, throwing a grappling hook toward a piece of the drone's landing gear. The Combat Information Center on the Lincoln watched the feed from the helicopter's nose camera. The tension in the room was a physical weight. The watch officer spoke into the long-range radio. Iranian patrol craft. This is United States Naval Forces. You are interfering with a salvage operation in international waters. Disengage immediately. The response came back in accented but clear English. American vessel. This is the Islamic Republic Navy. You are in our search and rescue zone. This aircraft violated our sovereign airspace. It is now the property of the Republic. You are ordered to leave the area. Negative, the watch officer replied. The aircraft was in international air. We are reclaiming our property. On the water, the situation shifted from salvage to standoff. The Iranian boats began to circle the floating fuselage, creating a barrier of wake and steel. One of the boats turned its bow toward the American helicopter. A sailor on the deck uncovered a shoulder-fired missile tube. The pilot of Guardian 1 saw the movement. Guardian 1, I have a man padlock. They are painting me. Hold your position, command ordered. Do not fire unless fired upon. At 4:45 in the morning, the first Iranian boarding team jumped from their boat onto the slick, white surface of the Global Hawk's fuselage. They began to hammer at the access panels of the sensor suite. 5:10 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The pre-dawn light began to gray the eastern horizon, revealing the true scale of the confrontation. The wreckage of the Global Hawk was no longer alone in the water. Two more Iranian fast boats had arrived, their engines idling with a low, predatory thrum. But the radar on the USS Abraham Lincoln showed a much larger threat approaching from the north. An Iranian Alvan-class frigate, the Sahand, had broken off from a coastal patrol and was now making 28 knots toward the debris field. Inside the cockpit of Guardian 1, Lieutenant Miller adjusted his flight controls. The salt spray from the rotor wash was beginning to coat his windscreen. Below him, the scene was chaotic. The Iranian boarding team had brought a portable circular saw onto the fuselage of the drone. The high-pitched whine of the blade cutting through carbon fiber reached the pilots even over the roar of their own engines. Miller keyed his radio. Command, this is Guardian 1. The Iranians are cutting into the primary sensor bay. There are sparks. They are through the outer skin. If they reach the processor core, we lose the hardware. The response from the Combat Information Center was immediate. Guardian 1, this is Lincoln. You are authorized to use non-kinetic deterrents. Do not fire. I repeat, do not fire unless the frigate opens its weapon cells. At 5:20 in the morning, a second American helicopter, call sign Guardian 2, banked into position on the opposite side of the fuselage. This bird carried a team of specialized Navy divers. They sat on the edge of the open cabin door, their fins dangling over the water. They were waiting for a window of opportunity that was rapidly closing. The pilot of Guardian 2 spoke to his lead diver. Chief, the Iranians have a line on the tail. If they start towing, you cannot go in. It is too dangerous. The chief petty officer looked at the Iranian fast boats. He could see the sailors on the decks watching them through binoculars. One of the Iranians raised a camera, taking high-resolution photos of the American helicopters. It was a battle of optics as much as a battle of recovery. We go now, or we lose the pod, the chief replied. Tell the pilot to drop us 50 meters out. We will swim under the surface." At 5:30 in the morning, the strategic stakes shifted. A flash of light appeared on the horizon to the north. It was the Sahand. The Iranian frigate was now visible to the naked eye. It was not slowing down. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the admiral watched the digital display. He knew that the moment the frigate arrived, the rules of engagement would change. The frigate had the firepower to swat the helicopters out of the sky. The admiral turned to his communications officer. "Get the State Department on the line and tell our pilots to prepare for a fast rope deployment. If the Iranians won't leave the wreckage, we are putting boots on that fuselage alongside them." The gray light of morning revealed a sea filled with tension. Neither side was willing to blink. The silent, shattered remains of the world's most advanced drone sat between them, a prize that could change the balance of power in the Middle East. 5:45 in the morning, the Pentagon and the Persian Gulf. Halfway around the world, the National Security Council was already in an emergency session. The digital map on the wall of the Situation Room showed the cluster of icons near the Strait of Hormuz. One icon was a stationary red cross, marking the downed drone. Several blue circles represented the American helicopters. A single large red triangle, the Iranian frigate Sahand, was closing the distance. The president's advisors spoke into a secure line to the admiral on the USS Abraham Lincoln. "Admiral, what is the status of the sensor pod?" The admiral's voice was steady but urgent. "The Iranians are on the fuselage. They are using power tools. Our divers are in the water, but they are still 300 meters out. If the Iranian frigate reaches the site, our helicopters will be forced to retreat." "The directive is clear," the advisor responded. "That technology cannot be compromised. You are authorized to use electronic jamming to disrupt their communications. If they attempt to hoist the pod, you are authorized to disable the recovery cables. Do not escalate to lethal force unless the frigate fires first." At 5:52 in the morning, the Iranian frigate Sahand crossed the 10-mile line. Its fire control radar began to sweep the area. Inside the cockpit of the American helicopters, the electronic warfare suites chirped. It was a rhythmic, aggressive sound. The Iranian ship was locking its weapons. The pilot of Guardian 1 spoke to his co-pilot. "We are being painted. The frigate is tracking us." The co-pilot checked his displays, confirming. "They have a solid lock. Their 76mm gun is moving. It is following our hover." On the water, the situation was becoming a physical struggle. The American divers, moving silently beneath the surface, reached the underside of the floating Global Hawk fuselage. They could hear the muffled grinding of the saws from the Iranian team above them. The water was dark and filled with jagged pieces of composite material. The lead diver signaled his team. They carried a specialized acoustic device. It was designed to emit a high-frequency pulse that would make it nearly impossible for the Iranian boarding team to remain on the slick surface of the drone. "Initiate the pulse," the lead diver signaled. At 6 o'clock in the morning, a localized wave of sonic energy erupted from the water. On the surface, the Iranian sailors suddenly dropped their tools. They clutched their ears, their balance failing as the vibrations moved through the hollow airframe of the aircraft. One sailor slid off the side and into the water. The Iranian fast boats reacted instantly. They surged forward, their bows lifting as they accelerated toward the wreckage. One boat aimed its hull directly at the spot where the American divers had surfaced. The watch officer on the Lincoln saw the maneuver on the high-resolution feed. "They are going to ram our divers. Guardian 1, you are authorized for a low-level pass. Break their formation." The American helicopter dropped from 50 feet to 20. The massive downwash from its rotors hit the water like a physical blow. A wall of spray and wind hammered the Iranian fast boats, forcing the pilots to veer away to avoid capsizing. The radio on the international hailing frequency crackled with fury. "American aircraft, you are committing an act of war. This is your final warning. Leave our waters or be destroyed." The sun was now fully above the horizon. The shadows were long. The gray steel of the Iranian frigate was only 3 miles away. The time for diplomacy was vanishing. 6:15 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The heat of the morning sun began to bake the salt spray onto the hulls of the ships. The Iranian frigate Sahand was now less than 2,000 meters from the wreckage. Its forward gun turret was no longer tracking the helicopters. It was leveled at the horizon, aimed directly at the projected position of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The Sahand was a smaller vessel, but at this range, its anti-ship missiles were a credible threat to the American carrier strike group. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Lincoln, the air was cold. The only sound was the rhythmic pinging of the sonar and the low murmurs of the tactical officers. The watch officer stared at the primary display. The frigate is slowing down. They are preparing to drop anchor right on top of the debris field. Confirm, the radar officer replied. They are opening their hangar doors. I have a Bell 212 helicopter spinning up on their deck. 6:25 in the morning. Two American F-18 Super Hornets, call sign Raven 4-1 and Raven 4-2, appeared on the northern horizon. They were flying low and fast, less than 500 feet above the water. They arrived with a physical shockwave, the roar of their engines vibrating the decks of every Iranian boat in the water. The pilot of Raven 4-1 spoke to the controller. Lincoln, this is Raven 4-1. We are on station. We have eyes on the Sahand. We are holding a high cap orbit. The Iranian frigate responded by activating its primary engagement radar. The electronic signatures flared on every screen in the region. This was the maximum buildup. Every weapon system was energized. Every finger was on a trigger. The American divers remained clinging to the underside of the Global Hawk's fuselage. Below the waterline, the lead diver watched the shadow of an Iranian fast boat pass inches above his head. He looked at his teammates. They had successfully planted a GPS beacon on the sensor pod, but they could not extract it. The Iranian boarding team, though shaken by the sonic pulse, had returned to the fuselage. They were now attaching heavy steel cables to the frame. They are going to lift the whole section, the diver whispered into his underwater comms. Not today, the pilot of Guardian 1 replied. Command, the Iranians are preparing a heavy lift. If that frigate gets a crane on this bird, it is gone. Requesting permission to deploy the snipers. The authorization came back in seconds. Guardian 1. You are clear to engage the equipment. Do not target personnel. Disable the winch. At 6:30 in the morning, a marksman in the door of the Seahawk leveled a heavy caliber rifle. He waited for the roll of the helicopter to stabilize. Below him, the Iranian sailors were tightening the winch on their primary recovery boat. The marksman breathed out. He squeezed the trigger. The armor-piercing round shattered the winch's hydraulic motor in a spray of oil and metal. The recovery cable snapped, whipping across the water like a strike from a giant serpent. The Iranian sailors dove for cover. In that moment, the Sahand turned. Its siren wailed across the water, a long, mournful sound that signaled the end of the standoff and the beginning of a confrontation. Both sides had committed. There was no longer a path to a quiet resolution. 6:40 in the morning, the Strait of Hormuz. The world shrank to a single square mile of contested water. The Iranian frigate Sahand surged forward, its bow wave throwing a massive wall of white water over the floating wreckage. The Iranian captain had seen his recovery winch destroyed. He was no longer interested in a delicate salvage. He was moving to occupy the physical space. Inside the cockpit of Raven 4-1, the pilot gripped the control stick. Lincoln, the Sahand is accelerating. They are going to run over the fuselage. Our divers are still in the water. Raven 4-1. Stay on them, the controller replied. Show them your belly. The Super Hornet banked hard. It pulled 6 Gs, the air screaming over its wings as it passed less than 100 feet above the frigate's mast. The heat from the jet engines scorched the Iranian flag flying from the crane. It was a terrifying display of power. 6:41 in the morning. The Sahand did not flinch. It continued its course. On its deck, the crew uncovered a surface-to-air missile battery. The radar warning receivers in the American cockpits changed from a rhythmic chirp to a continuous, high-pitched wail. I am locked, the pilot of Raven 4-1 shouted. I have a solid track. Requesting permission to engage the battery. Hold, do not fire. 6:42 in the morning. On the water, the Iranian fast boats turned toward the American helicopters. They were no longer circling, they were charging. The sailors on the decks raised their rocket-propelled grenades. One boat was less than 50 meters from the open door of Guardian 1. The door gunner on the Seahawk adjusted his grip on the machine gun. They are leveling weapons. I have a clear shot. Sir, they are going to fire. Wait, the pilot commanded. His voice was strained. Sweat ran into his eyes. 6:43 in the morning. Below the surface, the American divers saw the massive hull of the Sahand approaching. It looked like a moving wall of black steel. The turbulence from the frigate's propellers began to suck the debris and the divers toward the spinning blades. We have to go, the lead diver signaled. Release the wreckage. Clear the area. The divers let go. They kicked hard, diving deep into the dark pressure of the Gulf. Above them, the shadow of the ship blotted out the sun. 6:44 in the morning. In the Combat Information Center of the Lincoln, the watch officer watched the icons merge. The red triangle of the frigate was now touching the blue circle of the debris field. The radar showed the Iranian missile battery was seconds from a launch sequence. The American F-18s were inverted. Their targeting computers locked onto the frigate's bridge. The admiral stood. His hand was hover over the red phone to the Pentagon. One word would start a war that would burn the region for a generation. Targeting systems are hot, the radar officer whispered. Everyone is locked. 5 seconds to impact. The tension was absolute. The air seemed to vibrate with the energy of 1,000 loaded weapons. 6:45 in the morning. 6:46 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The world did not explode. Instead, it went dark. Simultaneously, every electronic display in the region flickered and died. Inside the cockpit of the F-18, the pilot's heads-up display vanished. The screaming radar warning receiver fell silent. On the bridge of the Sahand, the digital navigation charts turned to black glass. The Iranian missile battery, seconds from launch, lost its targeting lock as its internal computers rebooted into a loop of gibberish. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. The pilot of Raven 4-1 pulled back on the stick, climbing by pure instinct as his primary flight instruments failed. Lincoln, Raven 4-1. I have total systems failure. I am flying manual. There was no response. The radio was dead. On the water, the Sahand's engines groaned and seized. The massive frigate, carrying thousands of tons of momentum, began to drift. It was no longer a warship. It was an unguided projectile. It was heading directly for the largest cluster of Iranian fast boats and the floating wreckage of the Global Hawk. A massive, localized electromagnetic surge had swept the area. It was not a weapon. It was an atmospheric anomaly, a rare and violent discharge triggered by the extreme heat and the concentration of high-powered radar emissions in a small, humid corridor. The pivot happened in the chaos of the blackout. The Iranian fast boats, losing their engine timing, began to stall. One boat, caught in the Sahand's massive bow wave, turned sideways. The frigate's steel hull clipped it, sending the small craft spinning across the water like a toy. Iranian sailors jumped into the sea to avoid being crushed. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Lincoln, the screens slowly pulsed back to life. The backup generators had kicked in. The watch officer stared at the primary plot. What just happened? Massive EM interference, sir, the radar officer reported. Every sensor in the box just got fried. But look at the wreckage. The high-resolution camera, now rebooted, zoomed in on the debris field. The impact of the frigate's bow wave had done what the American divers could not. It had flipped the Global Hawk's fuselage completely over. The classified sensor pod, which had been bolted to the lower airframe, had snapped off under the sudden, violent torque. The pod, a 300-pound cylinder of titanium and gold-plated circuits, was no longer on the surface. It was sinking. It was falling through the water column, moving away from the Iranian boarding teams and the American divers alike. The Iranian captain of the Sahand looked out from his bridge. He saw his own men in the water. He saw his fast boats scattered and disabled. He looked at the empty, bobbing white shell of the drone's fuselage. The prize was gone. The immediate threat of a missile exchange evaporated, replaced by a desperate, mechanical emergency. The Iranians were no longer focused on the Americans. They were focused on the survival of their sailors in the water. 6:55 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The electronic fog began to lift. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the tactical screen stabilized. The chaos of the blackout was replaced by a grim reality on the water. The Iranian frigate Sahand was dead in the water, its crew scrambling to lower lifeboats. 4 Iranian sailors were bobbing in the swells, separated from their stalled fast boats. The watch officer looked at the sonar feed. The sensor pod is at 80 meters. It is resting on a silt shelf. It is currently in international waters, but it is less than 2 miles from the Iranian maritime boundary. What is the status of the Iranian teams? The admiral asked. They are in rescue mode, sir. Their frigate is focused on recovering their men and their damaged patrol craft. They have lost their eyes on the pod. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the American divers, who had survived the frigate's passage by diving deep, surfaced near Guardian 1. They were exhausted, their oxygen levels low. But they had seen the pod break away. The lead diver signaled the helicopter. He spoke into his mask radio. Guardian 1. The pod is detached. It is clear of the airframe. We have a solid acoustic ping on its location, but we need a heavy lift to get it out of the silt. 7:15 in the morning. The strategic situation had fundamentally shifted. The classified technology that had almost sparked a war was now a hidden prize on the seafloor. The Iranians knew it was down there, but their primary recovery vessels were disabled or occupied with search and rescue. The American pilot of Raven 4-1 circled high above. He watched the Iranian frigate through his infrared targeting pod. Lincoln. The Sahand is getting its engines back online. They are blowing black smoke. They will be mobile in 10 minutes. Inside the Lincoln, the command team faced a choice. They could send in a deep submergence vehicle to grab the pod, but that would take hours. Or they could use a remote purging signal. The watch officer turned to the electronic warfare specialist. If we cannot recover it before the Sahand reboots its systems, can we kill it from here? We have the burst code, sir, the specialist replied. A high-intensity microwave pulse directed at the pod's coordinates. It will melt the gallium nitride processors. The Iranians will get a pile of scrap metal, and we get to go home without a fight. Wait for my mark, the admiral said. He was watching the Iranian captain on the screen. The man was standing on the bridge of the Sahand, looking toward the American helicopters. He was no longer reaching for his holster. He was waiting. The two sides were staring at each other across a mile of water, both realizing that the cost of the prize was beginning to exceed its value. The tension had not disappeared, but it had matured into a cold, professional understanding. 7:30 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The sun was higher now, its glare turning the surface of the water into a blinding sheet of white gold. The temperature on the decks was climbing toward 100 degrees. The immediate adrenaline of the near collision had faded, replaced by the grueling, methodical work of maritime recovery. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, a radio technician adjusted his headset. A new signal was coming in on the bridge-to-bridge frequency. It was not a threat, it was a request. The Iranian captain of the Sahand spoke. His voice was tired, but the professional edge remained. American vessel. We are conducting a recovery of our personnel and a disabled craft. We request that your aircraft maintain a distance of 1,000 meters until our men are out of the water. We have no hostile intent toward your helicopters. The admiral looked at the screen. The Iranian frigate was indeed stationary, its crew pulling a soaked sailor from the swells. Grant the request, the admiral said, but maintain the orbit. And tell him we are also conducting a recovery of our equipment on the seafloor. 7:45 in the morning. The two navies, which had been seconds from a kinetic exchange, were now operating in an informal, unspoken truce. The American helicopters pulled back to the 1,000-meter mark. The Iranian fast boats gathered their scattered crews. Below the surface, the sensor pod sat in the silt at 80 meters. It was silent. It was waiting. Inside the Lincoln, the electronic warfare specialist held the remote purging trigger. Admiral, The Sahand is bringing its secondary crane online. If they drop a sonar sled, they will find the pod in minutes. Should I initiate the purge? The admiral hesitated. He was looking at a satellite feed of the entire region. No, if we burn the pod now, they will know we are still on it. They might see it as an act of electronic sabotage. Let us try a different way. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the American commander sent a direct message to the Sahand, Iranian vessel. We are sending a submersible to recover a navigational component. We will not interfere with your search and rescue. We suggest a split of the debris field. You take the airframe, we take the internal hardware. Neither side needs to escalate further. Minutes passed. The only sound in the Lincoln was the hum of the cooling fans. The response from the Sahand was brief. Agreed. We will take the wings and the fuselage. You have 1 hour to clear the seafloor. After that, this zone returns to our patrol. It was a classic de-escalation. Both sides could claim a victory. Iran would show the world the shattered remains of a billion-dollar American drone as proof of their sovereign defense. The Americans would walk away with the only part of the aircraft that actually mattered: the data. 8:15 in the morning. The seafloor, 20 nautical miles off the Iranian coast. The deep water was a world of muted blues and swirling silt. A robotic arm, attached to an American unmanned underwater vehicle, reached into the darkness. The vehicle, launched from a support ship miles away, moved with surgical precision. Its high-intensity LED lights cut through the gloom, illuminating the titanium cylinder of the sensor pod. The pod was half buried in the fine sand of the shelf. Inside the control room of the recovery ship, a pilot manipulated the haptic controllers. I have a firm grip on the primary housing. Engaging the lift bags. Small, high-pressure balloons attached to the pod began to inflate. Slowly, the heavy piece of technology lifted from its burial place. It rose through the water column, a ghost returning to the surface. 8:25 in the morning. On the surface, the Iranian frigate Sahand maintained its position. True to the captain's word, the Iranian vessels did not interfere. They watched from a distance as the American recovery ship winched the sensor pod out of the water and onto its deck. The moment the pod was secured, it was immediately covered with a heavy, opaque tarp. Simultaneously, the Iranian fast boats moved toward the floating white fragments of the Global Hawk's wings and fuselage. They worked with equal intensity, pulling the massive pieces of carbon fiber onto their decks. To a satellite passing overhead, it looked like a coordinated salvage operation between allies, rather than a standoff between rivals. 8:45 in the morning. The last piece of debris was cleared from the surface. The American helicopters, Guardian 1 and Guardian 2, banked away toward the south, their fuel levels reaching the critical reserve. The F-18 Hornets, Raven 4-1 and Raven 4-2, climbed high into the blue sky, their contrails marking a final line over the strait. The watch officer on the USS Abraham Lincoln watched the radar icons separate. The red triangle of the Sahand began to move north, back toward the Iranian naval base. The blue icons of the American strike group returned to their patrol stations. Debris field is clear, sir, the radar officer reported. The Iranians are heading home. We have the hardware. The admiral sat back in his chair. The adrenaline that had sustained the room for 4 hours began to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, hollow exhaustion. Signal the Pentagon. Mission accomplished. The protocol held. But tell them we were 10 seconds away from a different ending. The immediate crisis had been averted. The weapons were cold. But as the ships moved apart, the silent understanding between the two crews remained. They had looked into the abyss, and together they had stepped back. The prize was divided, the secrets were safe, and for one more day, the strait remained open. 10 hours later, the Pentagon and Tehran. 6:15 in the evening in Washington. 3:45 in the morning in Tehran. The immediate tactical tension had evaporated, replaced by the quiet, cold intensity of strategic analysis. In the sub-basement of the Pentagon, a team of signals intelligence experts sat around a mahogany table. They were staring at a high-resolution playback of the Global Hawk's final flight path. The lead analyst tapped a glass screen. Look at the drift. It is subtle, 3 meters per minute. It began 40 miles before the intercept. Across the table, a general leaned forward. Are you saying the Iranians didn't just shoot it down? They lured it in? The data suggests a sophisticated GPS spoofing attack, the analyst replied. The drone's internal navigation thought it was 10 miles further out to sea. It wasn't a pilot error. It was a digital kidnapping. The Iranians created a localized GPS bubble that made the aircraft believe it was in international air, while their own radar saw it crossing the territorial line. They didn't want to fight. They wanted a legal justification to seize the sensor suite. In Tehran, inside a secure facility near the Al-Borz Mountains, a parallel conversation was taking place. The Iranian captain of the Sahand stood before a committee of high-ranking officers. On the table between them was a single, jagged piece of the Global Hawk's wing. It was white, scarred by the heat of the missile impact, and smelled of burnt composite. The Americans were prepared, the captain said. His voice was low. The moment the electronic surge hit, they did not panic. They used the chaos to reposition. If we had pushed for the sensor pod, we would have lost the frigate. Their jets were inverted. They were ready to strike the bridge. One of the officers gestured to the wing fragment. And the technology? What did we gain? We have the airframe. The captain replied. Our engineers can study the stealth coatings and the structural architecture, but the heart of the machine is gone. The Americans recovered the processor core. We have the body, but they kept the mind. The strategic fallout was already beginning to ripple through the diplomatic channels. In New York, the United Nations Security Council was preparing for a late-night session. Both nations had already released carefully worded statements. Iran claimed a heroic defense of its borders. The United States claimed a successful recovery in international waters. Neither side mentioned the electronic blackout. Neither side mentioned how close they had come to a regional war. Military analysts would later call it the Persepolis Protocol. It was a new kind of conflict, one where the victory was not measured in territory or casualties, but in gigabytes and deniability. The rules of engagement for unmanned systems were being rewritten in real time. On the USS Abraham Lincoln, the hangar bay was quiet. The recovery ship had offloaded the tarp-covered sensor pod. It sat under 24-hour guard, a silent witness to a battle that officially never happened. The technicians who would spend the next month taking it apart knew the truth. The pod hadn't just survived the crash. It had recorded every frequency, every radar pulse, and every radio transmission of the Iranian defense network during the standoff. The Americans had lost a drone worth $200 million, but they had gained the electronic fingerprint of an entire nation. In the world of modern warfare, it was a trade they would make every time. The sun had set over the Gulf. The waters were dark and still, hiding the secrets that remained on the silt shelf. The crisis was over. The chess game had simply moved to a different board. 3 days later, the Arabian Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln moved steadily through the deep blue swells, leaving a wide, white wake that stretched toward the horizon. On the flight deck, the rhythm of operations had returned to a familiar mechanical precision. But the atmosphere inside, the command spaces remained reflective. The Persepolis Protocol was now a classified case study, being analyzed by every major military academy in the world. Strategic experts would later agree that the 30 minutes between 6:15 and 6:45 in the morning represented a fundamental shift. In the nature of 21st century conflict, it was the first time two major powers had stood at the absolute precipice of war, over a machine with no human soul on board. A final strategic assessment was filed with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The document was brief. It concluded that the victory in the strait was not tactical, but psychological. By choosing to divide the wreckage, both nations had acknowledged a shared reality. In an age of hyper-advanced weapons and instant communication, the greatest risk to national security was no longer a lack of information. It was the speed of escalation. The final thought offered by the analysts was philosophical. Modern warfare is often described as a game of chess played at the speed of light. But in the waters off Bandar Abbas, it had been a game of poker played in the dark. The American side had bet on their technical recovery capability. The Iranian side had bet on their geographic home field advantage. In the end, both sides had bluffed, both sides had folded, and both sides had walked away with enough of the pot to justify the risk. Hours later, in a quiet corner of the carrier's wardroom, the pilot of Guardian 1 sat with a cup of coffee. He looked out the small porthole at the empty ocean. He thought about the Iranian sailors he had seen through his optics. He thought about the winch he had shattered and the man who had fallen into the water. There were no medals for this mission. There would be no public parades. The sensor pod was already on its way to a laboratory in Maryland, where its data would be harvested to program the next generation of stealth algorithms. The Global Hawk airframe, now in a warehouse in Tehran, would be photographed and put on display as a symbol of resistance. The machine was gone, but the piece remained. It was a fragile, high-tension piece, maintained not by treaties or handshakes, but by the cold calculation of professional soldiers who understood the cost of a single mistake. The sun set for the third time since the shootdown. The red light of the evening bled across the water, mirroring the color of the warning lights in the cockpit 4 days prior. The Gulf remained a place of shadows and secrets, a contested corridor where the next crisis was already beginning to take shape. But for now, the sensors were silent. The radars were at standby. The ocean was still.